Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast. Today, as always, we're talking all things to do with injuries in the Premier League, cutting through rumour, misinformation, just giving you great analysis backed by data, backed by expert insights. We're always here every Thursday through the season, so hit that subscribe button as well. And as always, I'm joined by Raj of 3CB Performance. Raj, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Been watching some Champions League. I don't remember what that's like. It's been so long for Arsenal, but
distracting us from Arsenal as well. I mean, the less we talk about that, the better. So Ben, how are you doing as well?
Yeah, all good. Brand new website went live this week. Just in time for Christmas. It's an early Christmas box. Santa's been good. So his fingers crossed it just stays live and we don't have too many glitches along the way.
Ben's Christmas gift for everybody in the community there. I mean, I do recommend people subscribe, but also do check out the website. It's got some great little kind of analyses on there. But today, of course, we are talking about injuries in the Premier League. You know, a lot of people talk about this being the most wonderful time of the year, but in terms of Premier League injuries, it really isn't. There's a high number of injuries. So we're going to have a look at maybe some of the data and the reasons why. Ben, do you want to give us, the headlines? What kind of situation are we looking at?
Yeah, I mean, this is often something that's touted in the press, and people wonder, the reality of the situation. Do we see more injuries? And yes, we do, would be the short answer. Inherently, that can be in excess of maybe 50%, month on month when we come from November into December. And that can rise even further as we go into January as well. And that's not just hamstring issues, that's generally injuries across the board. And what we classify as an injury as time loss. And that means that a player misses at least one Premier League fixture.
And so with that kind of data as well, Ben, is this season particularly worse than other seasons at the moment in terms of trends? Because we haven't got to the end of December.
Yeah, so in terms of where we're at now, if we look at year on year, particularly last season was a little bit of an anomaly in the fact that we had such a quick turnaround. We had very little preseason. So in terms of incidence rates, they were fairly high. But when we look across those sort of 5-season average, this year in comparison, we were performing quite well. We were down across all metrics, all time loss injuries down anywhere between sort of 10 and 15%. However, we've now crept into December and already we're seeing huge numbers, both injury incidents and of course, with the latest news coming out of the Leicester and Tottenham camps, massive issues with regards to COVID-19.
And so throwing it to you, Raj, I mean, why does this occur? Is a lot of people blame it on the tight fixture schedule. Is that oversimplifying it though?
I mean, it's really just fatigue. Especially with soft tissue injuries, it's really fatigue and overload as you get to this point. And so, and you combine that with, as you get deeper into the season, the games naturally get a little bit more intense because teams are jockeying a little bit more. You're starting to see a clearer picture of where a team may or may not be going, or certain players who may or may not be performing, which then leads to either them, playing more potentially or playing higher intensity matches. But the big one is really just fixture schedule. They can fast in December into January during the festive schedule. And so you add in what Ben talked about, there's fatigue already creeping up. Then you add in all these games coming quickly, and it's really just a recipe for a lot of injuries.
I think both of you should answer this one, but does the Premier League, do you think, have more of an issue because of the schedule? We do now have this winter break, but a lot of other European leagues kind of stop, close to Christmas. They kind of see that Christmas period is almost sacrosanct. They don't have the legendary Boxing Day matches, which I, for one, love, but maybe selflessly, we should put that aside and say that it's actually too much strain on players. Raj, what do you think on that situation? Does Europe handle it a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, Bundesliga for example, has an extended break typically during this period. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of games. It's really, really quick games. And they tend to be, like I just talked about, higher intensity games because you're starting to see teams jockeying for position. And, it's the intersection of risk and intensity and fatigue and all these things come together. So certainly I know the fans enjoy it. I don't think the players enjoy it very much. And so I don't think the coaching staff or the backroom staff enjoy it much at all either.
I mean, Ben, would the data back this up as well? Does the Premier League fare a little bit worse during this period than the European leagues?
Yeah, I mean, look, we know that the risk of injury incidents rises significantly with increased minute exposure. I mean, the Boxing Day fixtures itself this year, the schedule isn't too bad with regards to, there will be a game, I think it's in and around maybe the 18th, if I've got that right, and then the 26th. The issue will be that game shoehorned in between Boxing Day and then New Year. And also we're coming off the back of, for what the most part is, around about 10 games for some teams from December the 1st through to January the 1st, so that's playing every other day. And now when you factor in existing injuries and COVID, and I use Tottenham and Leicester as good examples, you're maybe forced, external factors will force your hand into playing, players who are maybe not necessarily 100% fit. And I'm thinking ahead of the Europa League tie with Yuri Tielemans coming off the back of a calf problem. Brendan Rodgers has got 7 players missing, so you might have to throw him in. Tottenham, we know the situation there. Giovanni Lo Celso coming off the back of a knee injury after 3+ weeks out. He might have to come in. So, you're playing, you're forced to play players who ordinarily, you maybe wouldn't consider for a start or even inclusion in that matchday squad.
I mean, adding to this, does Euro 2020 have to be factored in as well as, quite a shortened pre-season? Players didn't have a proper rest then either. So is that adding to the magnitude of what is quite a bad situation for players with fatigue, Ben?
Yeah, massively, particularly those players that went deep into the tournament. So you're looking at maybe those Italian and those England players inherently. The research will indicate that the less hours you have on the training pitches, the more susceptible to picking up injuries you are later in the season. And Raj has touched upon this many times before about this fatigue effect. And he uses the analogy of having this bucket, almost of this drip and tap, and it just drips and drips and drips until almost it gets to the point where the bucket cannot hold anymore. And that's when you see players suffering setbacks, injuries. And it's a bit of a vicious circle.
So, Raj, with these soft tissue injuries, what are the ones that people should come to expect to be happening over this period? And how much worry should there be from fans and clubs alike?
Yeah, the big ones I was for adductors, so groin tightness, groin injuries, hamstring, quad, and calf. Those tend to be the most prevalent, high level. Generally, I think Ben could probably touch more on that in terms of Premier League data itself. But those are the big ones. Something that's maybe not, it's hard to measure is as fatigue sets in, you now have people maybe going into challenges they may not have done before, not able to react as quickly either. And so how does that play a part when it comes to contact injuries, right? So that's another factor that comes in with fatigue as well.
And why specifically those injuries, Raj? Like what biomechanically is this fatigue having? What kind of effect is that having on the body?
Those are just the highest demand muscles typically during football are those, the adductor, hamstring, quad, calf tend to be the highest demand muscles in general. You could even say, I would even say tendon wise, Achilles tendon comes under a lot of demand as well. I won't get into the specifics, but some of the ankle tendons as well. So,
and you said it, Raj. Ben, we've discussed it quite a bit, but hamstring, it's that time of year. Maybe just quickly touch upon the fact that we've seen a huge rise in the number of those injuries as well, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, so typically season on season, regardless of the players, the advances in technology, the tracking elements that we include in football now, around about 2/5 of every injury, around 40% of all injury are hamstring related. And I recall a podcast with Johnny Wilson a while back discussing this very issue with regards to why, there are so many injuries. And there's a couple of reasons that he outlined. We've discussed where teams are picking up injuries. And around this time of year, when the fixtures are coming so thick and fast, players are not able to train properly. So you're maybe, again, forced to bring in players who are slightly deconditioned. You're throwing them into the cut and the thrust of the Premier League. And that's, where the fatigue comes in, and that's where they suffer setbacks. And a second point that he also made is, from his experience of working at elite level sport, one of the things that he noticed, that clubs aren't training players to become faster. They are just recruiting fast players. So the expectation of those existing players to perform at a higher speed, high intensity runs over greater distances, over longer periods, is putting that additional strain. And that's why these players are breaking down.
Raj, I want to take the attention to maybe some other sports as well. Again, we've kind of compared the Premier League to Europe's leagues, but what about football, or maybe just the Premier League specifically compared to American sports? Is the load managed a bit better during this festive period over there?
Yeah, I mean, there's typically, like, you'll have your marquee games on Christmas, but there doesn't tend to be like this thicket of games that are surrounded. You'll have that, let's say for NBA, you're going to have fluctuation, but it's a much larger schedule. It's 82 games. So you're going to have natural ups and downs, but they've made adjustments over the last 3 years. They're limiting back-to-back days. They're limiting 4 games in 5 nights. They're limiting how much travel. So they've actually taken it down to trying to reduce that load through a scientific perspective and really limit those aspects, especially the travel aspect, which in the States is much larger, right? You're traveling West Coast to East Coast for a lot of these teams. And so they're doing their best. Like, for example, sometimes you'll see in the NBA now, well, you'll play a team back to back, like there. So you'll just play them twice in a row rather than having to, let's say, travel twice to get to somewhere. They'll just play them twice in a row to limit some of those, mitigate some of those issues that come with those miles and those distance traveled.
I mean, really quickly on that then, Raj, would you say that the Premier League, European leagues, are they lagging behind America in terms of maybe a science-backed schedule?
I don't know if I could say if it's science-backed. It's hard to say if they are or aren't. I would say that I understand why the Premier League does it. I mean, there's one reason, but but I would say, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of stress on these players, and we've seen it. I mean, you're going to have World Cup qualifying this summer. You're going to have a Winter World Cup. You have AFCON coming up this next January. It's pretty self-explanatory what is valued right now in world football, right? So compared to, I mean, the States, you still have that expectation. For example, again, using the NBA, they had the shortened off, like prior to this past season, to last season, they shortened their off season to the shortest off season ever for any NBA, for any professional sports team in the States, because they wanted to get their schedule back on track following the pandemic. And so that put a major strain on the NBA for only for 1 year. They're only doing that for 1 year. And with football, you're seeing now some of these condensed schedules and a lot of this, disrupted rhythm for multiple years.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And in terms of that, what matters at the moment, that might be covered in tomorrow's discussion, because we got an extra video. I mean, talking about Christmas, we got an extra video with Raj this week, so people can enjoy that. But for now, that is all on the discussions today in terms of injuries and why there are so many during this festive period. But for now, just going to remind people, do subscribe, do check out Raj at 3CB Performance, and do check out our new website as well. But for now, I'm going to say thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again very soon.